In the dimness of a rainy night in Chicago, Angela pulled her old sedan to a stop outside her apartment building in Little Village. She was bone-tired after a 12-hour shift on the emergency floor at Mount Sinai Hospital. Her hands moved out. Of habit, engine off, keys in her coat pocket, purse slung over one shoulder, while outside the windows, rain drummed steadily on the roof of the car. The city's usual noise had softened, leaving only the tapping sounds and a slick shine. On the empty street, Angela carried herself with that same determined energy all working mothers have, the kind you only notice when it's the only thing that keeps you putting one foot in front of the other. In the back seat, her son, Matteo, sat curled up with his battered backpack and a book that had been his companion since Angela picked him up from after-school care. He glanced up from the pages and watched his mother as she gathered her things, aware in a vague way of the heaviness she carried home with her, even if nobody ever talked about it out loud. Matteo was only 10, but he already sensed the rhythm of their life, the rushing between appointments, the quiet smiles his mom offered, and the way she scanned the street before unlocking the doors. The glow from the streetlights soaked the sidewalk in uneven yellow patches, pooling in the puddles along the curb, while the rest of the world seemed paused. It was that space between exhaustion and relief, when you finally make it home, but you are not quite there yet. Inside the car, the air was thick with the shared silence of two people who held on to little routines. A whispered, "We made it," from Angela, a deep breath from Matteo that kept them moving. But that night, something felt different. Both of them, in their own way, sensed it. Maybe it was the long silence in the hallway earlier, or the way the rain didn't let up, or maybe it was just that feeling that sometimes arises when you need things to be simple and safe again. Yet, life seems ready to test you one more time. As Angela reached for Matteo's hand, neither guessed the night would end up carrying more weight than either of them would have imagined when they woke up that morning. Angela squeezed Matteo's hand, flashed him a tired smile, and promised, "I'll just be a minute, kiddo. Stay buckled up, okay?" He nodded, trying to keep his voice upbeat as he answered, "I'll be right here, Mom." Underneath it, though, his eyes showed he was a bit more awake to her exhaustion than she wanted to believe. In their world, little promises like these mattered, a sort of unspoken pact that as long as they trusted each other, nothing too bad could happen, not even after the hardest days. Matteo settled deeper into his seat, watching his mom glance back at him before she stepped into the misty air, shutting the car door that always stuck a little. Angela hurried across the parking lot toward the small convenience store at the gas station. If she could just grab a carton of milk and get change for laundry, she figured both of them would have what they needed to make it to morning. There was a quiet rhythm to these moments, the way she always looked both ways, the quick check of her phone, the habit of waving before ducking inside. Through the windshield, Matteo watched her go, comforted by the routine, the way the city at night glowed with possibility and a little bit of threat. Then, something shifted. The only other car in the lot, a dark blue sedan, rolled in, slow and quiet. You could tell by the subtle markings and the spotlight on the driver's side mirror that it belonged to the Chicago Police Department. The people inside, 2 officers, whose eyes seemed to scan every small detail, weren't relaxed or distracted, not the way regular customers might be. Instead, they watched the lot with practiced alertness, their heads turning in near unison as Angela made her way past. Inside the car, Matteo felt a sudden tension mix with the comfort he'd felt a moment ago. He had grown up knowing that certain things could happen unexpectedly, that sometimes what seemed safe wasn't. He sat up a little straighter, peering over the dashboard. The officers seemed to be looking for something, or maybe someone. That rush of worry, the kind only kids know when the routines of their safe world break, flashed through Matteo. Everything, from the light rain to the distant sound of a siren, suddenly felt sharper, as though the night itself was beginning to hold its breath. Officers Michael Davis and Sarah Thompson stepped out of the police cruiser with a kind of practiced slowness, their boots making shallow splashes in the parking lot puddles. They moved with the quiet certainty of people who believed they were in charge, as if the city itself belonged to them for the night. There was nothing rushed about the way they straightened their jackets or adjusted their belts, and their eyes stayed fixed on Angela even before she got close to the door of the convenience store. Angela noticed them almost right away, the way their gazes never seemed to soften or look away. She braced herself, holding her keys just a bit tighter, her body language turning cautious even though she did everything right. She did not have to check. She had always known encounters like this could happen any night. Michael looked over at Sarah and nodded, their silent agreement almost chilling. Then they began a slow, deliberate path toward Angela. When they stopped her, Michael was the one to speak first. His voice was cool, a little too steady. "Evening. Ma'am, is this your vehicle parked over by the pump?" He didn't ask in a curious way. Instead, his eyes flicked quickly over her hospital scrubs, the employee badge, the tired lines on her face. Sarah stood silent, arms crossed, scanning Angela from head to toe as if waiting for some sign of a lie. Angela answered, keeping her tone polite and as even as she could. "Yes, officer, that's my car. I just got off work and stopped for groceries." Her words came out steady, but she felt the old, heavy anxiety sink into her stomach. Michael's next question barely masked suspicion. "Can I see your license and registration?" The way he asked made it more of a demand than a question. Angela carefully handed over each document, making sure her movements were slow and clear, all while struggling to keep her fear under wraps. Sarah took the papers, glancing through them, while Michael circled to look through the windows of the car. Even though she had done nothing wrong, Angela felt the humiliation creeping in, being asked again, for the third time that month alone, to prove who she was. All the years of hard work, the quiet pride in her job, the countless times she had come home exhausted, none of it seemed to matter now. She held on to her poise, wanting Matteo, who was watching from the car, to see her handle it with dignity. The questioning turned oddly repetitive, making it clear to Angela that this wasn't just a routine check. Michael asked again, now with the slightest smirk, "Are you sure this car is registered to you?" As if her nursing badge and clear license weren't enough. It wasn't the first time she'd been spoken to like this, but each time felt just a little sharper, like a quiet nudge reminding her that belonging could always be challenged. Sarah, flipping through Angela's documents, started leading with new questions, but always circled back to the car and her job. Her tone never changing, pretending curiosity, but edging close to disbelief. "Long shift tonight?" she asked, eyebrows raised, as if waiting for Angela to contradict herself. "And you went straight here, didn't stop anywhere else?" Angela answered patiently, her hands held in clear view, her breath a little shorter with each question. Inside the car, Matteo sat tense and unmoving, watching the scene through rain-speckled glass. He noticed the way his mum planted her feet and stood a little taller, but also the tiny way she shifted from foot to foot, little signs of worry she tried not to let show. In that moment, something inside Matteo settled. He'd always known not every adult could be trusted, but learning to read the world this way felt older than he wanted to be. Instead of grabbing the game console that usually helped him pass the time, Matteo quietly slid his phone from his jacket pocket. He didn't want to draw attention, so he kept the screen low in his lap, hands steady even though his heart pounded. With careful, practiced motions, he opened the camera app and tapped the record button, aiming it just enough to catch the officers. And his mom in the frame, All those talks Angela had given him about staying calm and keeping safe came back to him now. Technology, she had said, could be a shield if he ever needed it, and tonight he felt the weight of all those lessons pressing on his shoulders. As the officers' voices drifted through the glass, Matteo knew he might need proof, something to show if things took a turn. For two people who relied so much on little routines to stay safe, knowing when to break one for protection suddenly made perfect sense. Inside the car, Matteo's heart pounded hard enough that he thought someone outside might hear it, but his mind kept working through the rush of fear. With his hands only a little shaky, he managed to unlock his phone and pull up the message app. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Uncle Chris, their real point of safety, the one Angela always said to text if anything felt wrong, no matter what. Police stopped Mom at the gas station. Matteo typed quickly, then followed it up with their exact location before hitting send. Knowing Chris was out there only a few minutes away gave just enough courage for Matteo to keep going. Without hesitating, Matteo started recording video again, moving the camera as slowly as he could to take in not just his mom and the police officers standing rigid under the rain-streaked light, but also the police car's license plate and the narrow alley nearby, just in case someone asked about the details later. Even at only 10, Matteo understood that sometimes being quiet was not enough, that keeping a record could matter far more than words ever could in moments like these. He could not hear everything, but the way the officers spoke, the stiffness in their bodies, and the way his mother's jaw tightened told him plenty. He wished it was just another boring night, homework waiting on the table at home, but this was different. Out in the fluorescent glow, Angela held firm, never letting her voice raise or falter. She explained again, this time a little slower, but just as clearly, repeating her name and her address, even spelling it out as Sarah scrawled notes on a pad. Angela's steadiness made the officer's refusal to look her in the eye stand out. Even more, Michael's mouth twisted as if doubting every word, while Sarah kept glancing at her watch, impatient but unmoved by Angela's fatigue or dignity. Angela could feel the circle tightening, sense that every polite answer she gave simply rolled off the officers, who treated her as little more than a box to tick or a problem to solve. Still, she never dropped her gaze. She thought of Matteo only a few steps away and pressed on, not because she believed it would change their minds, but because she needed to show her son what refusing to bow looked like, even when nobody cared to see it. The tension, which had simmered low under the surface, suddenly spiked as Michael and Sarah turned away from Angela and moved toward the car. Matteo noticed the shift right away. The officers were no longer just watching. They were intruding, crossing a line that turned the night from uncomfortable to openly threatening. Sarah leaned close, peering through the window, her features unreadable, while Michael rapped his knuckles against the glass, making Matteo jump. "Is your son all right?" Michael asked, loud enough for anyone to hear if the lot had not been so empty, but his words twisted with a sharp undertone. "It's getting late for a child to be just sitting in a car, don't you think?" The suggestion was clear, stinging more deeply than any straightforward accusation could have. Angela's jaw tightened. She could hear the implication. "What kind of mother are you?" And she met it with the calm fierceness she had learned over so many years. "Matteo is fine," Angela answered, her voice steady, making sure she didn't sound defensive. "We just came from the hospital. I'm a nurse, and he's been here with me the whole time." To her, these details were part of a life built on responsibility and care, but she knew that, to these officers, everything was up for scrutiny. Sarah, with an eyebrow raised, added, "Does he have any health issues we should know about? He looks pretty nervous back there." There was a coldness to her tone, a taste of judgment that Matteo caught even through the glass. He felt his chest get tight, not only from fear, but from the hint of shame, a feeling he shouldn't have to carry at his age. Angela positioned herself between the officers and the car, as if her presence could block out their words. "My son's health is private," she said firmly, holding her ground. "He's just tired, the same as I am. We're going home." There was no heat in her voice, only a flat strength, the kind you use when you have nothing left but your right to stand your ground. In the empty parking lot with almost nobody else around, the feeling of exposure pressed in heavily. Angela knew that with no other witnesses, the rules changed and the danger grew. Still, she refused to give in, her focus on protecting everything about Matteo that she could, even if all she had left were her words and the courage it took to speak them. Michael held Angela's license and registration in his hand, longer than necessary, flicking them with his thumb before suddenly letting them drop to the wet ground. The cardboard slid across the slick pavement, landing near Angela's shoes, and the officer made no move to help. It was a move loaded with message, daring her to stoop and pick them up in front of him. Each second stretched as Angela knelt down, her uniform soaking up the dirty moisture, her knuckles whitening as she claimed her own property back, refusing to let anger show on her face. Above her, Sarah's gaze remained hard, almost bored, as though this routine was just another part of the job. "People like you, working these late shifts, ever think maybe your kid would be better off at home?" she tossed out, her voice light, but the words cutting right through the dusk. Michael leaned back slightly, arms crossed, a posture that made it clear this was a display of power and not concern. Angela straightened, her back aching not just from the strain of her long shift, but from the weight of all she had to carry. Her pride, her worry, and the need to protect Matteo's spirit from the tiny cracks these moments could leave. She tucked the cards back in her wallet, every movement deliberate, as if reclaiming ground that was supposed to be hers all along. The questioning kept coming, each question less about the law and more about testing her patience and resilience. They asked about her hours at the hospital, how she managed childcare, and if Matteo got enough sleep. With each answer, Angela clung to her dignity, her words measured and even, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing humiliation shift into defeat. Inside, though, she felt that old familiar ache, a strange mix of weariness and outrage, a feeling known to too many women like her, always having to be twice as careful, twice as strong. More than the exhaustion, it was this bitter struggle against being seen as less than fully human that threatened to undo her. Yet as the officer's eyes darted between her and the car, Angela's stance did not falter. She kept herself upright for Matteo, for herself, and for all the times she had promised not to let anyone else decide their worth. The atmosphere, already heavy, broke down all at once when Angela, desperate to reclaim a piece of control, reached into her bag for her phone. She wanted to call Chris, or maybe even record what was unfolding, knowing by now that sometimes the only power left came from having someone on the other end of the line. But before she could unlock the screen, Michael lunged forward and grabbed her wrist tightly, making her drop the phone. It skittered across the puddled asphalt, the screen lighting up once in the dark as if watching from a distance. "Don't move. Keep your hands where I can see them," Michael barked, holding onto her so hard that she felt the corners of her vision blur from the ache. All the things Angela had done to protect herself, her calm words, her steady presence, her efforts to shield Matteo, tumbled away, replaced by the raw panic of being physically overpowered. The world outside the gas station lights, the quiet streets of Chicago, humming in the background, faded away until all that remained was the squeeze of Michael's fingers on her arm and Sarah's cold stare. Sarah moved in closer, ready for any sign that Angela might fight back, her own hand never straying far from the radio at her belt. Matteo was crying out inside the car now, too scared to even remember that he was recording, watching everything he knew of safety turn upside down in a matter of seconds. His own feelings of helplessness flooded every inch of his body, but he kept his trembling hands carefully out of sight, afraid that any movement might make things worse. Angela held tight, twisted toward the direction of her phone, but there was nothing she could do. Every attempt to ask for help was ignored, her words drowned out by false warnings, and the noise of Michael's voice raised in authority. In a moment, the familiar place where they shopped and fueled up had been turned into a stage for threats and pain. Home now felt impossibly far away. The lights of passing cars seemed suddenly much too distant, and the thin hope of a stranger stepping in slipped away with each passing second. She kept her eyes open for Matteo's sake, refusing to let him see her give up, even as part of her wondered how much more either of them would have to endure before someone finally answered. From the back seat, Matteo's world shrank to the tightness in his lungs and the shaking of his hands as panic stole his breath. He coughed hard, his chest burning, tears streaming down his face, not just from fear anymore, but because each gulp of air was a battle he was in danger of losing. He fumbled under his jacket, searching the seat, knowing exactly where his inhaler was, but struggling to grip it with fingers that seemed to have forgotten how to work. Every second mattered, but terror made everything slow. His body, already tense from sitting still, now trembled with the urgency of someone who knew what it meant to fight for every breath. Angela's eyes darted wildly between her son and the officers holding her back, the nurse inside her screaming, louder than the mother, begging them to just let her get to her boy. "He can't breathe. Please let me help him," she cried, her voice pitched higher than she meant, desperation breaking through the steady calm she'd worked so hard to keep. But Sarah only shook her head. Skepticism painted clear across her face. "We're not playing this game. Sit down," she snapped, blocking Angela's way with a hard elbow, the badge cold and bright under the gas station lights. It was as if, at that moment, any show of care Angela gave her son was suspect instead of something expected. The laws of compassion seemed to be suspended, pushed aside by assumptions and contempt. Inside the car, Matteo finally closed his hand around the inhaler, fumbling with the cap as his breaths came shorter and his vision started to spot. He tried to call out to his mum, but all that came out was a choked whimper. Angela's arms strained against Michael's grip. Her whole life had been about fixing, mending, being ready to help. Yet here, every reason that made her a good mother was twisted into provocation, just another excuse for them to keep her away. Sarah glanced inside, eyeing the inhaler as if it was nothing, her words dismissive and cruel. "He's fine. Calm down," she muttered, never breaking eye contact with Angela as Matteo's gasps echoed louder. That moment stripped Angela of everything but the most basic urge to protect her son. But the line between love and survival had never felt so thin or so dangerously fragile. In the chaos, with voices rising and the world spinning just out of reach, something in Angela snapped. Driven by instinct stronger than fear, she wrestled free, if only for a breath, and reached through the backseat window. For the briefest second, her hand found Matteo's, pressing the inhaler into his trembling grip. That tiny moment, the click of plastic meeting palm, felt like a crack of light slicing through the storm. Matteo wrapped his fingers around the inhaler, fighting the urge to sob, and managed to bring the device to his lips. His first desperate breath of medicine was a shaky gasp, but it reached deep inside, coaxing his struggling lungs into a little more peace. The sting along his airway eased just a bit. His mother's touch, even if only for a second, felt like hope. But Angela's triumph didn't last. Michael, reacting in anger, yanked her away from the car so hard that her shoulder wrenched painfully. Resisting arrest, huh? Thought you were smarter than that, he barked, voice cold and triumphant, as if he had been waiting for her to give him any reason. He twisted her arms behind her back, the rough metal of the handcuffs biting into her skin, while Sarah stood by, already reciting those familiar charges that could turn anyone's life upside down in a heartbeat. The flood of accusations: uncooperative, obstructing justice, endangering a child, filled the empty space with the sound of a false trial. The truth of what just happened was buried under an ugly chorus of official words, rewritten before Mateo's eyes. From the back seat, Mateo struggled to catch his breath, the noise around him blurring into a single, sickening memory. He watched. His mother's body pulled away from him, her face twisted not in anger, but in a deep, helpless kind of worry. It was a look he would never forget, burned deeper because he knew what it cost her to risk everything for that small act. He was still just a boy, but in those moments he felt the expectation to understand, react, and endure, without anyone there to show him how. The pain was everywhere, in his chest, in his mind, and in the knowledge that the world could turn on you in a parking lot, with nobody around to lift a finger. Not yet. Just as Mateo feared his mother would disappear into the night, the air changed again. Out of nowhere, strong headlights sliced through the gloom of the lot, cutting sharp shadows across the pavement. Mateo's heart flipped, hope flickering for the first time since the nightmare began. Through the bright glare walked a figure he knew and trusted, his Uncle James. James was no stranger to long nights and hard conversations. He was known in their South Side Chicago neighborhood as someone who had stood up for people many times, a man whose calm presence alone could make others fall silent and listen. James worked as a union organizer and was the older brother who taught Angela how to advocate for herself, who once told Mateo that courage was doing the right thing, even when your voice shook. Now, as he strode onto the scene, you could almost feel the temperature drop. Every step James took felt deliberate, never rushed, like someone who had faced intimidation before and would not be scared by a badge or a harsh word. Angela caught sight of him just as Michael was about to push her toward the patrol car. The officers paused, eyes flicking from the flashing headlights to the broad-shouldered man who stood taller and sturdier than either one of them. James did not shout. He did not need to. His voice rolled out, even and commanding. "Take your hands off my sister right now." The words hit with a force that felt physical. Michael loosened his grip, almost unconsciously, and Sarah took a step back, lips tightening. It was like a pressure valve suddenly opened. The sense of helplessness leaked out, replaced by a tentative relief stretching across Angela's tired face. Some might have seen just a man in an old army jacket, but everyone on that lot felt the power of history, of someone who had built respect, brick by brick, over years of looking out for his own. James made no threats. His authority came from every neighbor who had called him when the system failed, from every community meeting where he had spoken while others hesitated. His simple command, for an instant, turned the chaos and danger of the moment on its head. Mateo, chest still tight but less desperate, met his uncle's eyes through the window and, quietly, started to hope again. James stepped closer, not needing to rush or shout. His presence alone filled the empty spaces between the cops, his eyes steady on Michael and Sarah. He calmly pulled out his phone, recording everything, making it clear that nothing happening here would stay hidden. "You both know exactly who I am," he said, never breaking the even tone that carried more weight than any threat. He spoke softly, but every word landed hard, almost echoing through the gas station. "You know my sister, and you know this will not stand." Michael's confidence cracked first. He let go of Angela's arms altogether and straightened his belt, face hot with the embarrassment of being challenged. Sarah tried to recover, launching into a quick explanation about protocol and her concerns for the child's safety. But James raised a single hand and silenced her, just like he had quieted an angry union hall. No, there's no excuse. You both have crossed a line, and now you'll answer for it. Angela's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, cuffed hands trembling but finally free from rough hands. In a few seconds, she became more than just the weary mom pulled over at the wrong gas station on the wrong night. She was someone who mattered, someone who belonged, and whose story would not vanish quietly. Her brother's reputation in the community and among the public worked fast. An officer from a neighboring district recognized James's name and joined them by the car, asking straight away, "Is everything all right here?" The sudden shift in tone was obvious. The officer's power drained out the way a summer storm blows over after a loud clap of thunder. James had always told Angela that her place in the world was worth defending. Now that lesson was not just for her, but for everyone watching. Mateo, the other drivers in the lot, even the two cops who finally started to realize they could not hide behind their badges anymore. Angela's status in that moment changed. She wasn't the accused, but someone wronged, with a protector by her side and proof on her brother's phone. Sarah's shoulders drooped, and Michael busied himself with useless paperwork, both of them avoiding James's gaze as he continued to record, making sure this story would have witnesses and a fighting chance at justice. Minutes stretched out, but then things shifted fast. Two more squad cars rolled up, their blue and white lights swirling quietly, splashing long reflections over the gas station windows and cars. The arrivals were not Angela's enemies, nor were they under Michael or Sarah's control. They answered directly to James, who had reached out to his contacts at the Chicago Civilian Office of Police Accountability. These weren't just any officers. They were from the unit that checked up on claims of abusive policing, and their arrival brought a different sort of weight to the air. A sense of real accountability settled over the scene like fog rolling in from Lake Michigan. Where arrogance had just hung over Michael and Sarah, now only discomfort and uncertainty remained. The newcomers stepped out and spoke briefly into their radios, their words clipped and professional, before addressing James and glancing over at Angela and little Mateo. One officer, a tall woman with a visible badge that read Oversight, walked straight over to James and said, "You did the right thing calling us. We'll take it from here." Without ceremony, instructions came down for Michael and Sarah to hand over their badges and step aside while an initial investigation began, right in front of the gas pumps. Their authority, once wrapped tight around them like armor, appeared to melt away under the eyes of their own colleagues. The looks exchanged between the regular cops and the Civil Oversight Unit were heavy with meaning. This was no sweep-it-under-the-rug moment. With each order given and each badge put away, a new kind of spotlight hit the scene, and the humiliation on Michael's face was impossible to miss. Angela, still feeling the press of handcuffs on her wrists and the ache in her arms, watched as the world finally seemed to stand up for her, even if only because someone powerful had forced them to. James stayed close, voice low and steady as he assured her that things were being done right. Mateo, who had not let go of his inhaler, looked around at the sudden reversal, trying to make sense of how all those people in uniforms could swap roles so quickly. No one said much, no apology was offered yet, but the ground underneath Michael and Sarah felt unstable. What once seemed so ordinary, the power to intimidate, had turned into something shameful and small. For everyone watching, it was a moment when the rules changed, if only for one long, uncomfortable night in Chicago. Inside the bright wash of ambulance lights, things finally began to settle down. Emergency medical workers, moving with calm assurance, led Angela and Mateo away from the chaos and into the back of the ambulance. The door swung shut, cutting off the noise and the tense voices from outside. For the first time in what felt like forever, Angela let herself lean back against the seat and draw a real breath, her body shaking from the release of adrenaline and fear. A paramedic checked Matteo's breathing, listening to his chest and asking if he could take a few deep breaths. Matteo, still clutching Angela's hand tightly, nodded wordlessly, his fingers wrapped around hers like the last link to something steady. Even though the rescue crew spoke in calm, practiced tones, Angela could see they were moved by what they saw. She felt the tension in her shoulders begin to loosen as they told her that Matteo's breathing was improving, and she herself had no serious injuries, just tenderness and the bruises already forming around her wrists. James hovered just outside, only stepping away when the medics made it clear they could handle things from there. He knew not to crowd the moment, offering his steady support just by being present. Angela looked out the window at her brother, meeting his eyes, both of them holding on to a silent understanding. Love did not always show up with grand speeches. It lived in actions, quiet and sure. Matteo would not let go, and Angela did not make him. She just squeezed his hand, letting him feel her warmth and patience as the ambulance pulled slowly away from the gas station. Every so often, Matteo caught a glimpse of James's steady figure in the rear window, hands in pockets, standing guard as the chaos faded behind them. For Angela, the sense of imminent danger gradually faded, replaced by something gentler but no less powerful, relief and a deep gratitude for the small, essential kindnesses that made all the difference. For the first time that evening, she began to believe that what happened did not have to become a nightmare that ruled their lives. The moment stretched out, quiet and safe, proving that sometimes just being there, being side by side, was enough to chase away the worst of the dark. As the ambulance made its way through city streets lined with shimmering lights and the buzz of late-night traffic, Angela sat quietly with Matteo. They were surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and soft beeps from the equipment. She watched the world slip past through the small side window, her reflection merging with the city lights outside. The sounds of that night, shouts, sobs, and the shuffle of hurried footsteps, echoed faintly in her mind, mingling with the rhythmic hum of the ambulance motor. Angela held Matteo's hand a little tighter, just to remind herself they were both still there, still moving forward. Back at the gas station, things were far from quiet. Michael, now in handcuffs, sat slumped on the back bumper of his squad car, face flushed with a mix of anger and shame. He glared at the ground, barely able to look at anyone, every muscle in his jaw tight with resentment over how quickly his power and certainty had disappeared. Not far away, Sarah avoided everyone's gaze, clutching a stack of paperwork and her discarded badge, looking lost. She seemed smaller, as if the weight of her own choices was finally settling on her shoulders. The reputation that made them bold in the first place was slipping away, bit by bit, out there on the oil-stained pavement. Word of what happened started to travel through the city. People filling up their cars at the pumps glanced at the paramedics, the extra patrol cars, and the scene of reversal that played out right there in the open. Tonight, Chicago felt wide awake. News would spread with every whispered conversation, every text sent, every online post. People who used to believe things like this would stay hidden now, saw that injustice was being called out, and maybe that would make things at least a little better for the next person. For Angela and Matteo, there were no high fives, no shouts of triumph. The fight to survive had left its mark, and now there was only the sharp realization that sometimes survival was its own stand against a world that demanded silence. Angela leaned into Matteo, letting herself simply exist in the afterglow of ordeal. A tired but unbroken mother and her son, riding into the unknown, hoping for the ordinary kind of peace that once seemed so simple but now, somehow, felt revolutionary. The next morning, As sunlight crept over the skyline and the city's noise started building again, a new kind of commotion took hold in downtown Chicago. The City Hall, usually a place where decisions were made from a distance and most people just passed through without notice, was now buzzing with energy. Word had spread fast about what happened the night before, and by the time Angela arrived, a line of people, reporters and city staff, had already formed near the entrance. Even those who had seen 1,000 council meetings before could tell something new was in the air. Angela's arm still ached each time she lifted it, the soreness a sharp reminder of everything she and Matteo had endured less than 12 hours before. She stood straighter than usual, though, with Matteo holding her good hand firmly. He looked tired but determined, holding on to his small backpack. The way he stuck by Angela's side made people look at him differently now, not only as the boy who had needed help, but as a quiet symbol for so many other kids who needed families and neighborhoods to keep standing up for them. In one of the main hearing rooms, the atmosphere felt stiff, all glass and cold surfaces. Facing a half-circle of city council members and police administrators was James, calm and steady as ever. He did not let the suits and ties change his tone or his focus. He spoke in the same firm way he did at every neighborhood block party or union meeting, bridging his official authority with the tenderness of a protective big brother. "Community justice," he said, looking around the room, "is not just a slogan for the campaign season or something you print on posters. It's in what actually happens when people are hurting and someone finally stands up." Angela listened and glanced at the phone she carried, the video from last night loaded and waiting. People whispered about it even before it played. Folks knew this was more than a piece of evidence. It was about letting others witness the truth for themselves and making it impossible for anyone in power to look away. Matteo squeezed his mom's fingers and looked up, catching James's encouraging nod. Whatever would happen next, Angela realized they were finally being seen, and she was not going to let that moment pass by quietly. When the video finally played in the crowded hearing room, the whole atmosphere shifted. All the side conversations faded until you could hear the faint hum of the city outside. The footage was raw. James's camera moved just enough to capture what mattered. Angela sat, watching along with everyone else as the events replayed. The shouting, the rough grips, Matteo's voice and her own, shaky but clear, insisting for help and fairness. No one watching could look away. Some council members straightened in their seats, others looked away with tight jaws. Witnessing it like this together left no room for doubt or denial. James's voice, usually steady, had a new gravity in the recording. Angela's plea, too, rang through the hall. She was not asking for pity. She was demanding that something change. She sat with her head high, refusing to look down at anyone or soften her story. When questions were thrown her way, she answered directly, never tugging at her sleeve to hide her bruised wrists. She stared back at the people in charge, as if daring them to let this happen again, to her or to anyone else who could not fight back on their own. Her calm fearlessness, the way she refused to accept empty apologies, made a bigger impression than a speech ever could. Matteo, sitting quietly at her side, was not overlooked. People looked at him, not with sympathy, but with the kind of respect usually reserved for someone much older. The truth. He had held onto his phone when adults lost their nerve, kept it rolling when things turned ugly, and handed over the evidence that changed everything, became clear as the video ended. His stillness, his gentle answers to questions about that night, showed a kind of strength not everyone his age should have to show. Yet in him, people saw a kid forced to grow up a little too fast, proof of the harshness, but also of what was possible when someone refuses to stay quiet. After the video, nobody tried to downplay what Angela and Matteo had gone through. The room, filled with both people in authority and ordinary neighbors, felt the weight of what they had witnessed. a sense of responsibility washing over everyone, as if this one night might just be the first of many changes. When reporters filed into the main lobby of City Hall that afternoon, the mood felt different from most official press briefings. There were no fancy podiums or scripted statements designed to smooth things over. Instead, officials and family members stood side by side, the air still thick with everything shown in that hearing room. Angela stood a few steps back from the microphone, her arm in a sling, while James faced the cameras directly. Without drama or exaggeration, he spoke about what had happened and what it meant for Chicago as a whole. He introduced the video evidence and photographs, saying, "No filters, no edits. This is what our community lives through if nobody is watching. From now on, we are done with pretending." His words landed heavily in the room. The video played again for the city's press. The same unsteady footage and desperate voices filling another space. And those who had not been in the hearing earlier now sat up straighter, their pens and recorders forgotten for a moment. Reporters snapped pictures of the battered phone that had captured the most important moments, nodding quietly as every detail flashed out on the overhead screens. Nobody made excuses or tried to cushion the truth. They let the horror stand on its own, knowing now that everyone was watching together. Photos of Angela, her face marked with exhaustion, her hand holding tightly onto Mateo's, circulated through local newspapers and online headlines within minutes. Community boards lit up as parents, and neighbors shared their own thoughts and stories, recognizing their own fears, reflected in Angela's loss of safety and Mateo's forced bravery. Out on the streets of Chicago, you could feel the response. Ripple outward, strong but calm. It was not just anger anymore. Couriers and barbers, teachers, nurses, business owners, even high schoolers watching from classroom screens all talked about what they had seen. Grocery stores and playgrounds buzzed with conversations about the case, but the focus was different this time. People banded together, determined to make sure every police stop, every act of authority would now have witnesses, eyes that refused to look away, and voices that demanded proper answers. Angela received messages from people she had never met, all saying the same thing: "We saw you, we will not forget." A new determination took root, quiet but sure, moving through every corner of the city as the news kept spreading. Inside the courtroom at the federal courthouse in Chicago, everything felt heavy but astonishingly quiet. There was no grandstanding, no shouting lawyers or crowds jostling for drama. The people seated in the pews and benches were residents, parents, teachers, and friends, faces you might see on any city bus or waiting in line at the corner market. Most had lived through moments like this, enough to recognize the seriousness on Angela's face as she took the stand. Angela's testimony felt different from some of the public speeches or TV interviews that came before. She answered each question plainly, her voice steady but low. You could tell she had replayed everything in her mind over and over again, from the shouts at the gas station to the ride in the ambulance and sitting in City Hall. She was not there to break down, and she did not. Instead, she stuck to the facts, what happened in those tense minutes, what Mateo had captured on video, and how quickly things had spiraled. She did not gloss over the fear or the anger, but Angela made a choice to keep her answers clear, sticking to what mattered most, and not letting anyone distract her with side issues. The defense tried to poke holes in the story, but the room seemed to close in on them with every new piece of evidence. The video, already seen a dozen times by now, landed even harder in this setting, projected in front of judges and attorneys who could not look away. After the video, the technical experts from the city's information department explained how it had been stored and checked for any tampering. Their careful, step-by-step descriptions left no room for doubt. Every image, every bit of sound, was real and confirmed. By the time closing arguments wrapped up, nobody really expected a different outcome. The verdict, delivered by a judge who had watched every moment closely, was clear. There would be accountability at last, and Angela felt some of the weight lift off her chest for the first time since that night. The other families in the room nodded at her, knowing well the lines of worry and relief that crossed her face. Nobody clapped or cheered. Instead, there was a long, quiet sigh as everyone realized things might finally start to change. The sentence was handed down, and the people responsible were led away quietly. Even then, the room did not erupt with applause or angry shouting. It was not that type of victory. Instead, as everyone filtered out into the marble halls and down the broad courthouse steps, you could feel a shift in the crowd outside. This gathering was not just about Angela or Matteo anymore. Now, it was about everyone who had ever faced moments like theirs and wondered if they could change anything, or if the struggle was worth it. People moved together, shoulder to shoulder, holding signs, holding hands, keeping each other upright. Their silence spoke of something deep, an understanding that winning a case is one thing, but staying awake and working for justice every day is what actually matters. Near the steps, James found Matteo waiting beside his mom. The look on James's face was a mixture of pride and nostalgia, maybe even a touch of sadness for the battles he remembered from years past. He knelt down to Matteo's level and pressed a small enamel pin into the boy's palm, a pin from a march decades before, worn edges showing it had already lived through plenty. "My father gave this to me when I was about your age," James said, his voice quiet. "We never dreamed we'd see a day like this. Now it's yours. Don't let it gather dust. Make it matter." Matteo looked at it, and then at his mom, realizing that this story was much bigger than just one family. In the weeks that followed, you could almost hear the wheels turning throughout Chicago. People showed up at city council meetings in greater numbers than ever. There were new laws drafted, more training for police, and changes in how every agency reported and reviewed incidents like the one Angela and Matteo had gone through. Angela became a familiar figure. Neighboring schools invited her to speak, parents often stopped her in grocery aisles for advice, and her voice carried real weight in meetings where decisions got made. She always made sure Matteo was part of those moments, never forgetting how his small act of courage had cracked open the truth for everyone. Eventually, Angela and Matteo settled back into their own rhythms, homework at the kitchen table, afternoons at the park, simple dinners together, but nothing would really be the same. Now, every kind gesture, every honest conversation felt like an act of faith in something better, a fresh start powered by hope and the light that comes when people, even in the toughest moments, refuse to stay silent.